He had killed men for less. He had torn apart entire packs with his bare hands for daring to breathe wrong in his direction. But tonight he stood completely still, because what he was seeing was not just betrayal. It was the end of everything he had ever allowed himself to love, and the worst part, he still couldn't do it. He couldn't kill her. Stay right there, because what happens next will break you. The moon was full and heavy. The night Alpha Caden nearly destroyed everything. It hung in the sky like a warning no one had listened to, round and white and bleeding silver light across the ancient trees of Ashwood. The forest was quiet, the way it always got quiet when something terrible was about to happen. Even the wolves knew. Even the wind stopped moving. Caden had been standing at the edge of the Moonstone Ridge for nearly an hour, waiting. He was the kind of man who never waited. He was the kind of man people waited for. When Alpha Caden of the Ashwood pack walked into a room, every werewolf in that room felt it in their chest, a tightening, a lowering, a deep animal awareness that said, "Something powerful is here. Step carefully." He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes so pale a grey they looked almost white in the moonlight. His jaw was sharp, his hands were large, and there was a scar that ran from the left corner of his mouth down to his chin. A gift from a war he had won when he was 19 years old. He was 26 now, and he had not lost a single fight since. But tonight, standing at the ridge, his hands were shaking. He told himself it was the cold. He told himself it was the altitude, the thin mountain air, the long walk through pack territory he hadn't taken in months. He told himself a lot of things that were not true, because the real reason his hands were shaking was a name. A face. A girl he had spent the last 3 years trying not to love and failing completely every single time. Her name was Sera. Sera Cole, daughter of a border wolf, a low-ranking female from the outer edges of Ashwood territory, with warm brown skin and dark eyes that caught light the way still water catches stars. She was 22 years old, slight but not fragile, quiet but not weak. She had a way of standing that made you feel like she had already survived whatever you were about to throw at her. Like she had already counted the cost and decided she was ready to pay it. Caden had met her 3 years ago, the night her father brought her to the Great Hall to swear pack loyalty after the border wars ended. She had stood in a room full of powerful wolves, beaters, warriors, elder wolves who could shift in under a second and tear steel with their teeth, and she had not flinched once. Not once. She had looked at every single one of them with those dark, steady eyes, and then she had looked at Caden. And something in him had cracked open. He had not been the same since. He had not claimed her. He had not marked her or told her what she was to him, because an alpha who needed someone was an alpha with a weakness, and Caden had spent his entire life making sure he had no weaknesses. His father had taught him that. His father had beaten that lesson into him, over and over, until it sat in his bones like old iron. So instead of claiming her, he had watched her. He had kept her close to the pack under the excuse of her father's loyalty. He had assigned her light duties in the Great Hall. He had made sure she was protected without ever admitting why. He had circled her the way a storm circles the eye of itself, always present, never touching, aware of nothing else. His beater, a broad and good-natured wolf named Marcus, had told him once very carefully that what he was doing was going to end badly. Caden had told Marcus to mind his territory. Marcus had been right. Because tonight Caden had come to Moonstone Ridge because someone had told him Sera was there. One of the younger warriors, a boy named Del, had come to him with eyes that wouldn't quite meet his and said quietly that he thought the alpha should know. That he thought Sera had been meeting someone at the ridge. That he thought it had been happening for a while. Caden had not reacted. He had simply thanked Del and dismissed him, and then walked alone through the silver-dark forest for 40 minutes until the trees opened up, and the ridge appeared before him, wide and flat and glowing under the full moon, with the whole of Ashwood territory spread out below it like a kingdom painted in shadow and light. And there she was. Sera was standing at the far edge of the ridge, near the old prayer stone that the pack elders used during the moon ceremonies. She was wearing a pale dress, simple, thin-strapped, the kind she wore when she wasn't thinking about being seen. Her hair was loose around her shoulders. She was not alone. The man standing with her was someone Caden recognized immediately. His name was Wren. He was tall, lean, light-eyed, and he had grown up in the Ashwood pack before leaving 3 years ago to join a neighbouring territory after a dispute over rank. He was charming, easy-smiling, the kind of man people trusted without knowing why. He was also, according to the Border Scouts, currently serving under the Greywood Alpha, Caden's oldest and most dangerous rival. Caden watched from the tree line, completely still. Ren was talking. Caden was too far away to hear the words, but he could see the way Sera was listening, head tilted slightly, hands clasped in front of her, something in her expression that looked like worry. Or sorrow, or both. And then Ren reached out and took her face in his hands. And Sera did not pull away. Caden felt something happen inside his chest. It wasn't pain exactly. It was something older than pain. It was the feeling of a thing that had been holding itself together for a very long time, suddenly understanding that it could not hold anymore. He stepped out of the tree line. He did not call out. He did not shift. He did not move like a man who was afraid of what he was about to do. He moved like what he was, the Alpha of Ashwood, the most feared wolf in 6 territories, a man who had ended lives with less provocation than this. Sera saw him first. She stepped back from Ren so quickly, she nearly lost her footing on the stone edge, and the colour drained from her face in a way that would have broken his heart if his heart was still capable of breaking quietly. Ren turned around slowly. He did not look afraid. That was his first mistake. "Alpha Caden," Ren said with that easy, careful voice of his. "This isn't what you're thinking." Caden stopped walking about 10 feet away from them. He looked at Ren for a long moment, then he looked at Sera. She was looking back at him with those dark, steady eyes, and for once there was something in them he had never seen before. She was afraid, but not of Ren, not of the situation. She was afraid of him. And that one thing was what stopped Caden's hand from closing around Ren's throat in the next 3 seconds, because Caden had never wanted Sera to be afraid of him. He had wanted a lot of things from her that he had never let himself say out loud, but never that. "Walk away," Caden said to Ren. His voice was low. It was the kind of low that wasn't quiet. It was the kind of low that filled the whole ridge. Ren glanced at Sera. Something passed between them, a look Caden could not fully read, and then Ren, either brave or very foolish, said, "I'm not leaving her here alone with you, not when you look like that." The next moment happened very fast. Caden moved, Ren shifted, halfway, his body caught between human and wolf, hands turning to claws and back again. And then there was a sound like the world had decided to inhale, and Ren was on the ground with Caden's knee on his chest and one large hand wrapped around his throat, not squeezing, not yet, just there. "Caden, Caden, stop." Sera's voice cut through everything. She was not screaming, she was not crying. She was standing right beside them and her hand was on Caden's arm and she was saying his name the way no one ever said it, like it was something real, something breakable, something worth saying carefully. Caden looked at her, and in his pale, almost white eyes, she saw something she had never expected to see in the eyes of the most powerful alpha in 6 territories. She saw grief. "Tell me it was nothing," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper now, which was somehow worse than when it had been filling the entire ridge. "Look me in the eyes and tell me it was nothing, Sera." The silence that followed that question lasted 3 full seconds. 3 seconds that felt like 3 years. Sera opened her mouth. And then she closed it again. And in the space of that silence, something in Caden's face went very, very still. He released Ren. He stood up slowly. He smoothed the front of his shirt with the careful movements of a man trying very hard to hold himself together, and then he looked at Sera one more time, a long, quiet look that said everything he had never allowed himself to say out loud. Then he turned and walked back toward the tree line. And Sera stood on the Moonstone Ridge in her thin pale dress, under the heavy full moon, with the wind finally starting to move again. And she knew in the deep, certain way that wolves know things, that something had just ended. She just didn't know yet what it was going to cost her. Because 3 days later, the summons came. A black-sealed letter, delivered at dawn by one of Caden's senior warriors, with no greeting and no signature. Just 4 words written in Caden's own hand, bold, controlled, deliberate, the way he did everything. "Come to the hall." And below those 4 words, written slightly harder, as though the pen had pressed down more than it needed to. "Come alone." Sera held that letter for a long time in the early morning light. She read it twice. She folded it once. She set it on the table in her small border cottage, and she sat very still and she breathed. Then she stood up and got dressed. Because Sera Cole had never been the kind of woman who ran from things. Not from war, not from grief, not from the pale-eyed alpha who had been watching her for 3 years and had never once said why. She walked through the ashwood forest alone, in the thin gold of early morning, through ancient trees that were older than any pack that had ever claimed this land. The roots were huge and gnarled, and the light came through the canopy in long diagonal strips that made everything look like it was happening inside a cathedral. Her boots were quiet on the soft earth. Her heart was not quiet at all. She walked for 20 minutes. She passed through the inner pack boundary, where 2 warriors stood at the stone arch and nodded at her without speaking. She walked down the long ceremonial path to the Great Hall, a massive, dark-timbered structure that sat at the heart of Ashwood like a fist at the center of a palm. Its doors were carved with the images of wolves mid-shift, bodies caught between human and animal, caught in the moment of becoming something they could never take back. She pushed the doors open. The hall was empty except for one person. Caden was standing at the far end of the hall in front of the Alpha's seat, a tall, dark wooden throne carved from a single ancient tree, with the pack's moon sigil cut deep into its back. He was not sitting. He was standing beside it, one hand resting on its arm, dressed in dark clothing, his pale eyes fixed on her the moment the doors opened. He did not greet her. He did not move. He simply looked at her across the long length of the empty hall, and said, in that low, full voice that left no space for anything else, "I need you to tell me the truth, all of it, whatever it costs you." Sera let the great doors fall shut behind her. The sound echoed for a long time. And then she walked forward, and she said the one thing that even she had not been ready to say out loud. The one thing that changed everything. The one thing that would make Caden understand, finally, why she hadn't pulled away from Wren on the ridge. And why doing so might have been the only thing standing between Ashwood and the worst war the pack had seen in a generation. She said it in a voice that was steady and clear and brave. And the moment the words left her mouth, she watched something shatter behind those pale, almost white eyes, something that had never shattered before, not in 26 years, not through 1 war or 10 battles or 1,000 nights of holding himself together alone. The most feared alpha in 6 territories stood in his own great hall. And he broke. Stay right here, because in the next chapter, you are going to find out exactly what Sera said, what secret she had been carrying, and why Caden, the wolf who had never in his life been unable to finish something, suddenly could not bring himself to do what every instinct in his body was screaming at him to do. Do not go anywhere. Chapter 2 starts right now. Chapter 2. The words hung in the air between them like smoke after a fire, heavy, slow-moving, impossible to wave away. Sera had said them, she had actually said them, and now they were out in the world, living and breathing in the cold air of the Great Hall, and there was no way to pull them back. No way to fold them up and press them back behind her teeth where they had lived for months. They were out. They were real. And the man standing across from her was looking at her like she had just reached into his chest and rearranged everything inside it. She had told him the truth. Not all of it, not yet, but enough. Enough that his face had changed in a way she had never seen before. And she had watched this man's face through border disputes and pack challenges and the kind of grief that most wolves didn't survive. She had never seen it change like this. "Say that again," Caden said. His voice was quiet, not soft. There was nothing soft about Caden, there never had been. But it was quiet in the way that the forest went quiet before a storm arrived, like the air itself was making space for something enormous. Sera held his gaze. "Wren is my brother," she said. "My half-brother. Same father, different mothers. He found me 8 months ago. He came to me because he needed help, and I gave it to him, and I have been meeting him in secret ever since because I did not know how to tell you. I did not know what you would do." The silence that followed was long. Caden did not move, he did not blink. His hand, resting on the arm of the great wooden throne beside him, pressed down slowly until his knuckles went pale. "Your brother," he said. "Yes. Wren, who left this pack 3 years ago, who is currently serving the Greywood Alpha, who is my enemy's wolf." He said each sentence the way you lay stones, one at a time, making sure each one was flat before placing the next. "That man is your brother." "Half-brother," Sera said, "and he is not serving Greywood by choice. That is the part I need you to understand, that is the part that matters." Caden finally moved. He stepped away from the throne and walked slowly to the center of the hall, stopping about 6 feet from her. Up close, in the thin morning light coming through the high narrow windows, he looked like what he was, a man who had been carrying something impossibly heavy for a very long time, and had gotten very good at making it look effortless. But his eyes were not effortless right now. His eyes were a storm. "Explain," he said, one word, just that. Sera had rehearsed this moment. She had rehearsed it lying awake in her cottage in the dark, staring at the ceiling, counting her breaths. She had rehearsed it walking through the forest. She had rehearsed it standing outside the great hall doors right before she pushed them open. But now that she was here, all of her rehearsal fell away, and what came out was just the truth, plain and unpolished and real. "Ren's mother and my father were together before my parents married," she began. "My father never spoke of it. I did not know Ren existed until he came to the border 8 months ago and told me himself. He had found out about me through the Outer Pack records, our father's name on both birth documents. He came to me not because he wanted anything from Ashwood. He came because he was afraid." Caden said nothing. He was listening the way powerful men sometimes listen, completely still, completely present, not interrupting, not reacting, just taking every word in and holding it. "He had been inside Greywood for 2 years by the time he found me," Sera continued. "He told me that when he left Ashwood, he had no intention of going to Greywood. He went first to the neutral territories, the eastern flatlands, and tried to live outside a pack. But you know what happens to lone wolves in the eastern territories." Caden knew, everyone knew, lone wolves in the east did not last long. The Greywood pack had been pushing its borders for years, and lone wolves were either absorbed or destroyed. There was no third option. "Greywood absorbed him," Caden said. "They did not give him a choice. The alpha Malik, he brought Ren in and told him that his skills were needed and that refusal was not something Malik entertained." Sera paused. "You know Malik." "I know Malik." "Then you know that when he says refusal is not something he entertains, he does not mean it as a preference. He means it as a promise." The muscle in Caden's jaw moved. Once, he knew exactly what Malik's promises looked like. He had seen the aftermath of 3 of them over the last 2 years, border wolves found at the edge of Ashwood territory, marked in the way Malik marked his warnings, which was not a way anyone forgot once they had seen it. "What does Malik want with Ren?" Caden asked. "Information," Sera said. "He found out somehow that Ren was from Ashwood. He found out that Ren had connections here. He has been using Ren to watch, to gather things, small things at first, routes the border wolves use, shift schedules, which warriors patrol which lines on which nights." She stopped. Her voice had been steady until right now, and now it slipped just slightly at the edges. "He has been pushing Ren for months, asking for more each time. Ren came to me because he did not know what to do. Because the things Malik is starting to ask for now are not small things anymore." The air in the hall changed. Caden felt it before he fully understood it. A shift in the temperature of everything. A tightening in his chest that had nothing to do with Sera on the ridge, and everything to do with what she was telling him right now. "What is Malik asking for now?" His voice was still low, still controlled, but there was something moving underneath it like deep water under ice. Sera met his eyes. "He wants the location of the moon well." The words dropped into the silence of the hall like a stone into still water. For a moment nothing happened. And then Caden turned away from her. He walked to the nearest wall and stood with his back to her, one hand braced flat against the ancient timber, his head slightly bowed. His shoulders rose and fell once, twice, slow and deliberate, the breathing of a man choosing very carefully not to do something he would regret. Sera watched him and said nothing. She understood in her bones what she had just said and what it meant. Everyone in Ashwood understood what the moon well meant. It was the pack's oldest secret, its deepest power, the thing that had kept Ashwood standing through 5 generations of war and challenge and loss. The moon well was not a legend. It was real, and it was hidden, and exactly 3 people in the world knew its location, the Alpha, the head elder, and the pack's sworn keeper. If Malik found the moon well, Ashwood would not survive the year. "How long," Caden said, still facing the wall, "has Ren been inside Greywood?" 2 years. And in 2 years of being Malik's wolf, how much has he given him? This was the question Sera had been dreading, not because she didn't know the answer, because she did. "Enough to give Malik a picture," she said quietly. "Patrol routes, shift times, the names of 3 of your senior warriors, the location of the eastern training grounds." She paused. "Ren told me everything he has passed. He kept account of it. He said he needs me to understand the full weight of what he has been carrying, so that when I bring it to you, you know exactly what you are dealing with." Caden turned around. And Sera, who had promised herself she would not flinch no matter what she saw in his face, came very close to flinching. Because what she saw was not rage. She had expected rage. She had prepared for rage. Rage from Caden was something you could navigate. It was loud and bright, and it burned fast and hot, and he always came back from it. What she saw instead was something quieter and more dangerous than rage. He was looking at her like he was trying to decide something. Like there was a question in his mind that his face had not yet answered, and he was standing very still, waiting to see which way the answer would fall. "You have been meeting with a Greywood spy," he said, "inside my borders for 8 months, and you told no one." "I told no one," Sera said, "because every time I thought about telling you, I thought about what you would do to him. He is my brother Caden. Whatever else he is, whatever Malik has made him into, he is the only family I have left. And I was afraid that if I brought him to you, you would see Greywood first and brother second, and I would lose him before I even had the chance to know him." Caden looked at her for a very long time. "And the kiss," he said. It was the first time he had mentioned it since she walked in. His voice did not change when he said it, which somehow made it worse. "On the ridge, last night, his hands on your face, what was that?" "He was saying goodbye," Sera said. "He told me that Malik's demands had reached a point where he could no longer delay. That within a week Malik would either have what he wanted or he would make an example of Ren. He came to the ridge to tell me he was sorry, that he had put me in an impossible position, that he understood if I hated him." Her voice broke once cleanly, and then she pulled it back together. "He was saying goodbye the way people say goodbye when they do not think they are going to survive." Something moved across Caden's face, fast and not quite readable, and gone before she could name it. He moved toward her then, not fast, not threatening. Just toward her, the way he sometimes moved when he forgot that he was supposed to be keeping a distance, closing the space between them until he was close enough that she had to look up slightly to hold his gaze. "You should have come to me," he said, quietly, not as an accusation, as something that cost him to say. "I know," Sera said. "You should have trusted me." "I know." 8 months, Sera. There it was, the first crack in that controlled voice, just a hairline fracture barely visible. 8 months you were carrying this alone. 8 months I was." He stopped. He pressed his lips together and looked away from her briefly, and when he looked back, the crack was gone, sealed up the way he sealed everything. 8 months I was watching you and not knowing what I was looking at. Sera felt something ache in her chest at that. Not guilt exactly, something more complicated than guilt. "What are you going to do?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment. "I'm going to bring Ren in," he said. Sera went still. "Not to punish him," Caden said before she could speak. "To use him. If Malik thinks Ren is still his and Ren is in my hall, then for as long as Malik believes that, I have a window, a small one, and I have spent my entire life making the most of small windows." Sera stared at him. "You're going to turn Ren into a counter-spy," she said slowly. "I'm going to give Malik exactly enough truth to keep him from moving until I am ready for him to move." Caden's voice was steady and sharp and clear. This was who he was, not just the wolf who stood at the ridge and shook with something he couldn't name, but this, the tactician, the alpha, the man who had won 10 wars before he was 25 by thinking 3 moves ahead of everyone else in the room. "And when I am ready, Ashwood will not just survive whatever Malik is planning. We will end it completely." Sera breathed. "There is something else," she said. She watched Caden's eyes. "Ren told me something last night, before you arrived, something he said I needed to know, even if it changed everything, even if it made things more complicated." She paused. "Something about Malik's plan that is not just about the moon well." Caden waited. "Malik has a spy inside Ashwood," Sera said. "Not Ren, someone else, someone who has been here for years. Someone inside your inner circle." The hall went so quiet that Sera could hear her own heartbeat. Caden stood completely still. "Ren does not know who," she continued. "He only knows that Malik receives information that could not have come from the patrol routes or the shift schedules, information about you specifically, about your decisions, your plans." She held his gaze. "Someone close to you is feeding Malik intelligence about the Ashwood Alpha." Caden said nothing for a long moment. Then he turned and looked at the great doors of the hall, the ones carved with wolves in the moment of becoming something they could never take back. And Sera watched his mind begin to move through every person he trusted. Every face in his inner circle. Every wolf he had believed without question was his. And she watched him understand, for the first time, that the most dangerous enemy he had ever faced was not standing at the border of his territory. It was sleeping under his roof. "Get Ren," he said, not to her, to the air, to the hall, to whatever came next. His voice was iron again, clean and cold and absolute. "Tell him to come in through the south passage before nightfall. Tell him to come alone and tell no one he is coming." Sera nodded. "And Sera?" She stopped. He was still looking at the doors. He did not turn around. But his voice when he spoke was different from any voice she had ever heard from him. Lower than control, quieter than command, stripped of everything he usually used it for. "I need you to understand something," he said. "What I felt last night on that ridge, I am not going to pretend I did not feel it. I am not built for pretending. But what happens next has to happen right, which means I cannot be distracted by." He stopped, began again. "I need to know that you are with me on this, completely. Not because of your brother, not because of Ashwood, but because you choose to be." Sera looked at his back, at the width of his shoulders, at the scar on his jaw that she could just see from this angle. She thought about 3 years of watching him watch her, and never saying a word. She thought about a pale-eyed alpha, standing on a moonlit ridge with grief in his eyes, instead of rage. She thought about the letter, 4 words in a pressed-down pen. "I am with you," she said. He nodded once, still did not turn around. She walked to the great doors and pushed them open, and the morning light came flooding in, sharp and gold, and she stepped out into it. And behind her, alone in the great hall of Ashwood, the most feared alpha in 6 territories stood with his hand braced against the arm of his throne, his head slightly bowed, and allowed himself exactly 30 seconds of something that had no name in the language of wolves. Something that felt from the outside like it might have been hope. And then he straightened, and he cleared his face, and he began to plan. Because somewhere in his house something was watching him, and he needed to find it before it finished what it had started. "You are not going anywhere, because Ren walks through those south passage doors, and what he brings with him is going to change everything you think you know about this story. The spy inside Ashwood is closer to Caden than anyone has imagined, and Sera is about to discover that the secret she has been carrying is not the only one buried inside this pack." Ren came through the south passage, just as the sun was pulling itself below the tree line. The south passage was not a door most wolves knew about. It was older than the great hall itself, a narrow stone corridor built into the base of the eastern wall during a time when the Ashwood alphas needed ways to move through their own territory without being seen. The entrance was hidden behind a curtain of thick ivy at the base of the forest embankment, and the corridor itself was low and dark and smelled of earth and old stone, the kind of smell that made you feel like the ground itself was breathing around you. Caden had told only 2 people about the South Passage in his entire tenure as Alpha. One was Marcus, his beater. One was the head elder, a grey-muzzled wolf named Aldrich who was 70 years old and had served 3 Alphas before Caden and would likely outlast them all. So when Sera slipped Ren through the ivy curtain just after dusk and walked him down the corridor and into the small stone room at the end of it, a room that smelled of candle wax and old decisions, and Caden was already standing there waiting. The first thing Ren did was look around the room with careful eyes and say, very quietly, "Not many people know this place exists." "No," Caden said, "they do not." Ren looked at him. He was lean in the way that men who had been living carefully were lean, not weak, but stripped down with nothing extra left on him. His eyes were light brown, almost amber, and they moved the way trained wolves' eyes moved, clocking exits and positions and distances without appearing to. He was around 25. His jaw had a shadow of a beard, and there was a thin scar above his left eyebrow that Sera had not noticed on the ridge in the dark. He looked, despite everything, like someone who had once been decent. Caden had spent the hours between Sera's departure and this moment doing what he did when he needed to think clearly. He had walked the inner pack boundary alone twice, at a pace just short of a run, letting the movement work through the tangle of everything and leave only the clean bones of what mattered. By the time he returned to the hall and made his way to the South Passage room, he had a shape for what he needed to do. Not a full plan, not yet, but a shape. "Sit down," he said to Ren. Ren sat. He moved carefully, the way you moved around predators, not submissively, but with full awareness of where the power in the room was sitting. Sera sat beside him. Caden remained standing. "Your sister told me everything," Caden said. He did not use the word half. He had decided in those hours of walking that the distinction did not matter for what he was about to do. Family was family. Leverage was leverage. I am not going to punish you for what you gave Malik. Whatever you passed before tonight is done and cannot be undone, and punishing you for it solves nothing and costs me a resource I currently need. Ren blinked. It was a small movement, but Sera caught it, surprise, carefully contained. What I need from you, Caden continued, is everything, not the summary. Not the version where you leave out the parts that make you look worse than you want to. Everything, every contact, every drop point, every piece of information you passed and how you passed it and exactly when. And after that, I need to know how Malik communicates with you, because starting tomorrow, I am going to be the one deciding what Malik hears. Ren was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You want to feed him false intelligence." "I want to feed him true intelligence," Caden said. "Carefully selected true intelligence that is accurate enough to keep him believing you and controlled enough to walk him exactly where I want him." Ren looked at him for a long moment. "That is more sophisticated than I expected." "Most things about me are," Caden said flatly, "start talking." And Ren talked. He talked for almost 2 hours, and Caden listened to all of it without interrupting, standing in the same position for the full 2 hours, arms crossed, pale eyes fixed on Ren's face with an attention so complete it was almost physical. Sera sat beside her brother and listened too, and as the picture built itself piece by piece in the candlelit stone room, she felt something cold settle into her stomach and stay there. Because what Ren described was not a border wolf, making desperate compromises to survive a dangerous pack. What Ren described was a Greywood operation that had been running inside Ashwood territory for considerably longer than 8 months. Malik had not become interested in Ashwood because of Ren. Malik had been watching Ashwood for years. Ren was simply the most recent and most useful tool in a strategy that had been building quietly, carefully, over a long time. The patrol routes and shift schedules Ren had passed were not random requests. They were specific, targeted, chosen to fill gaps in a map that Malik had clearly been drawing for a long time before Ren ever arrived in Greywood. Which meant the spy inside Ashwood had been feeding Malik the larger picture, and Ren had been filling in the finer details. When Ren finished talking, the room was very quiet. Caden unfolded his arms. He walked to the small table in the corner where a candle had burned itself halfway down, and he stood there looking at the flame for a moment. "The information about me specifically," he said. "The decisions, the plans, Malik's personal intelligence about the Ashwood Alpha. Did he ever tell you what he knew? Did he ever reference it in front of you?" Ren hesitated just a fraction of a second. Caden caught it. "What are you not saying?" he said. Ren looked at Sera briefly, then back at Caden. "Once," he said slowly, "about 4 months ago, Malik called me into his private hall, just me and 2 of his senior wolves, and he told me that he already knew more about Caden of Ashwood than Caden knew about himself. He said it like it was something to enjoy, like he had been sitting on it for a long time and it pleased him." Ren paused, and then he said something that I did not understand at the time. He said, "The Alpha of Ashwood has a wound that he does not know is a wound yet, and when it opens, the pack will open with it." The silence in the room changed quality. Sera felt it. The air shifted the way it had shifted on the ridge. Caden stood very still at the candle table, his back to them both. "A wound he does not know is a wound," Caden repeated. "Yes." He said nothing else, no name, no reference to what he meant. "No," he moved on immediately, like he had said more than he intended. "I did not ask. You did not ask Malik follow-up questions unless you wanted to become the subject of the next answer." Caden turned around. He looked at Ren, and then he looked at Sera, and something passed through his pale eyes too fast to read. "I need to think," he said. "You will stay here tonight, not as a prisoner. The door does not lock from the outside, but you will not move through the main hall. You will not be seen by any member of this pack until I have decided how to present your presence here. If anyone asks Sera where she has been, she was with the elder women at the Moon Circle. Is that understood?" Ren nodded. Sera nodded. Caden moved to the door, then stopped with his hand on the frame. "Ren," he said without turning around. "Yes. If any part of what you told me tonight is a performance, if any piece of this is a Greywood play designed to put you inside my walls with my trust, I want you to understand something very clearly." He paused. "I will find out. I always find out. And when I do, the fact that you are her brother will not save you." Ren held the Alpha's gaze without flinching. "I know," he said quietly, "and I am telling you the truth, every word of it." Caden looked at him for one more long moment. Then he left. The door did not make a sound behind him. Sera let out a breath she had been holding for what felt like most of the evening, and beside her, Ren leaned forward and put his face in his hands. Not dramatically, just tiredly, like a man who had been standing upright for a very long time and had finally found somewhere to sit down. "Is he always like that?" Ren said into his hands. "Yes," Sera said. "How do you stand it?" Sera looked at the door Caden had just walked through. "You get used to the temperature," she said quietly. Ren looked up and studied his sister's face for a moment with those careful amber eyes. "He is not just your Alpha," he said. It was not a question. Sera said nothing. Ren nodded slowly, as though she had answered anyway. They sat together in the small stone room while the candle burned lower. And outside, the night settled over Ashwood like a dark hand, pressing everything gently down into quiet. Caden, meanwhile, was walking. Not the boundary this time. He was walking the inner hall, the long, high-ceilinged corridor that connected the Great Hall to the Alpha's private chambers, lined on both sides with the carved images of every Alpha who had led Ashwood since the Pack's founding. He walked it slowly, with his hands clasped behind his back and his eyes forward, the way he had seen his father walk it during the hardest nights of his own leadership. He was thinking about wounds. Malik had said, "The Alpha of Ashwood has a wound he does not know is a wound yet." Caden was not a man given to uncertainty about himself. He had been raised to know exactly what he was and what he was capable of, and he had spent his entire adult life proving that knowledge correct. He did not have soft places. He had made sure of it. He had built himself the way you built a fortress, thick walls, narrow windows, one door, and he controlled the key. But as he walked the portrait corridor, his own face at 26 looking back at him from the newest carved image at the far end, he thought about Sera on the ridge. He thought about her hand on his arm and his name in her voice. He thought about what it had felt like to stand in that hall today and hear her say, "I am with you," and what it had done to some part of him that he had always treated as finished and sealed. And he thought about the fact that Malik knew. Somehow Malik knew. Which meant the spy inside Ashwood had been watching more than patrol routes and shift schedules. The spy had been watching him. He stopped walking at the end of the portrait corridor, in front of his own carved image. He looked at it for a long moment, the clean jaw, the sharp eyes, the set of the shoulders that even in carved stone somehow communicated, "Do not come closer than this." He thought about every person who had access to his inner movements. Marcus, his beater, Aldrich, the head elder, Dell, the young warrior who had come to tell him about Sera on the ridge, the 3 senior warriors whose names Ren said had been passed to Malik, the 2 women who maintained his private chambers, the pack healer, the border captains. He turned each face over carefully, the way you turned stones in a riverbed, looking for what lived underneath. And then slowly, a thought arrived that he did not want. A thought about who had told him to go to Moonstone Ridge last night. A thought about Dell, young, eager, earnest-faced Dell, who had come to him with eyes that wouldn't quite meet his and told him very carefully that he thought the Alpha should know. About Sera. At the ridge. At exactly the time she was meeting Ren. Caden stood very still in the portrait corridor. If Dell had wanted Caden to find Sera and Ren together on the ridge, if Dell had engineered that moment specifically, then it had not been loyalty that brought the boy to the Alpha's door. It had been a plan. Someone had wanted Caden to see that moment. Someone had wanted him to see what looked like a betrayal, what looked like his mate with another man's hands on her face, because a wounded Alpha was a distracted Alpha. An Alpha in emotional turmoil made decisions from his chest instead of his head. An Alpha who believed he had been betrayed was an Alpha who would push away the very person who might have helped him see clearly. And while he was distracted, while he was on that ridge burning with something he couldn't name, Malik's plan kept moving. Caden pressed one hand flat against the portrait wall. Dell, who had been recruited from a border family 3 years ago. Dell, who had come to Ashwood young and eager, and had worked his way steadily into the circle of the Alpha's household guard. Dell, who had access, every single day, to the rhythms and movements and private decisions of the Ashwood Alpha. Dell, who had known exactly where Sera would be and exactly what it would look like. The certainty settled into Caden's chest like cold iron. He was wrong about many things in his life. He was not wrong about this. He turned and walked back toward the hall with the long, measured strides of a man who had just located his enemy, and was now deciding, very carefully, what to do about it. He needed Del to remain unaware. He needed Del to keep reporting to Malik, because a spy who thought he was still hidden was infinitely more useful than a spy who had been caught. He needed Del to feed Malik the information Caden chose to give him, and he needed to do this while simultaneously finding out exactly how deep the Greywood operation inside Ashwood went. Which meant he needed help. He needed someone he trusted completely, someone he had never doubted, someone who was not Del and not in Del's circle and had not been anywhere near the information Wren had confirmed was compromised. He stopped outside Marcus's door. He raised his hand and knocked twice, the Alpha's knock, one short and one long, the signal that meant come now and come alone. The door opened in under 10 seconds. Marcus appeared in the gap, broad-faced, slightly rumpled from sleep, eyes already sharp because Marcus had spent his entire life being the kind of man whose eyes went sharp the moment he woke up. He took one look at Caden's face and opened the door wider without saying a word. Caden stepped inside. "Close it," he said. Marcus closed it. "I need you to listen to everything I am about to tell you," Caden said, "and I need you to do it without reacting. Not because what I am going to say is not worth reacting to, but because tomorrow morning you are going to have to look at someone in this hall and behave as though you know nothing, and I need you to be practiced at that before the sun comes up." Marcus looked at him steadily. "Tell me." So Caden told him. He told him about Wren, about Malik, about the moon well, about the internal spy, about the wound Malik had referenced. He told him about Del, the ridge, the timing, the careful engineering of a moment designed to break the Alpha's focus at exactly the right time. He watched Marcus's face as he spoke, and Marcus did exactly what Caden had asked. He listened without reacting, his expression moving through things quietly and putting them away and listening for the next piece. When Caden finished, Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Del has been in this pack for 3 years." "Yes. 3 years of access." Marcus's voice was carefully level. 3 years of watching you." "Yes." Marcus looked at the floor briefly, then back up. "What do you need from me?" "Tomorrow morning I need you to pull the patrol assignments and restructure the eastern border rotation. Do not tell Del. Do not tell anyone on the senior guard. Make it look like a routine rebalance. You do those every quarter. No one will question it. But I want the eastern border locked down in a way that Malik's people cannot move through without us knowing." "Done. And I need you to find out quietly who Del talks to outside of his official duties, who he eats with, who he walks with. I want a complete picture of his movements for the last 6 months, reconstructed from memory and observation without anyone knowing you are building it." Marcus nodded slowly. "And Del himself, you want him untouched?" "Untouched and unaware," Caden said, "for now." Marcus nodded again. He looked at Caden for a moment with the kind of steadiness that came from 20 years of loyalty and not 1 day of doubt. "And the girl," he said, carefully, the way you asked careful questions of powerful men about subjects the powerful men had never formally acknowledged. Caden looked at him. "She is under my protection," he said, "her and Wren both, whatever else happens." Marcus held his gaze. Nodded once with a particular kind of respect that was different from his usual deference, something more equal in it, more frank. "I'll start at first light," he said. Caden moved to the door. His hand found the frame. And then he stopped, the way he kept stopping tonight, in doorways, on thresholds, caught between one thing and the next. "Marcus," he said. "Yeah. The thing Malik said about a wound I do not know is a wound." He paused. "Does that mean anything to you? Is there something I am not seeing?" Marcus was quiet for a moment that lasted slightly too long. When he spoke, his voice was careful in a way it had not been before. "There might be," he said, "but I think it is something you need to hear from Aldrich, not from me." Caden turned and looked at him fully. "Why Aldrich?" Marcus met his eyes. "Because what I think Malik is referring to is something that happened before your time as Alpha," he said quietly. "Something the elders know that you were never told. Something your father," he stopped, started again more carefully. "Something your father decided you did not need to know." The hall was very quiet. Caden felt the cold iron certainty move in his chest again. Not about Dell this time. About something older. About something buried. Tell Aldrich I am coming to him at first light, Caden said. Marcus nodded. Caden stepped into the corridor and pulled the door shut behind him. He stood in the dark hall for a moment, the carved eyes of every alpha who had come before him watching from both walls. And for the first time in 26 years, the most feared wolf in 6 territories felt something he had no name for and no defense against. He felt like he did not fully know the ground he was standing on. Like the foundations of everything he had built his life on top of were older than he had thought and deeper, and possibly not as solid. He walked back to his chambers through the dark of the portrait corridor, and outside the great hall windows, the moon rose high and round and full over Ashwood, spilling its silver light through every gap in the ancient trees. And somewhere in the pack, a young warrior named Dell lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling, composing in his head the next report he would send to Greywood. He was smiling, because as far as Dell knew, everything had gone exactly to plan. If you have been watching this story and you have not yet subscribed to this channel, this is your moment. Because what comes next in Chapter 4 is the kind of storytelling that will ruin your sleep in the best possible way. We have a spy who thinks he is winning. We have an alpha walking toward a secret that is going to change everything he knows about himself. We have a girl who chose loyalty and a brother who is carrying more than he has said. And we have Malik, patient, calculating Malik, who has been building towards something that none of them have fully seen yet. Subscribe right now, turn on your notifications. Drop a comment below and tell me, who do you think the wound is? What is it that Caden's father decided he never needed to know? I read every single one of your comments, and your theories make this community something special. Aldrich was already awake when Caden arrived at his door. That was the thing about old wolves. They did not sleep the way young wolves slept, deep and long and trusting. Old wolves slept lightly in short stretches, with one part of them always listening. Aldrich had been listening for 70 years, and whatever that kind of listening did to a person over time, it had made him into something that felt less like a man and more like a very old, very patient piece of the forest itself. Rooted, unhurried, aware of everything. He lived in a small stone cottage at the rear of the pack's inner grounds, set slightly apart from the main buildings, half swallowed by the kind of ivy that had been growing on things for so long it had become structural. The door was heavy oak, worn smooth at the handle, and before Caden could raise his hand to knock, it opened. Aldrich stood in the gap. He was small and lean, white-haired, with a face so lined it looked like a map of somewhere that had seen a great deal of weather. His eyes were the dark, layered brown of deep forest earth, and they looked at Caden now the way they always looked at him, with a patience that was not passive. A patience that knew things and had decided, long ago, exactly when those things would be said. I expected you yesterday, Aldrich said. You are a day late. I did not know I was coming until last night, Caden said. I know, Aldrich stepped back from the door. Come in. The inside of Aldrich's cottage was warm and close and smelled of dried herbs and wood smoke, and something older beneath both of those, something that had no name but made the wolf part of you feel like it was standing in a very ancient place. Books were stacked along every wall. A low fire burned in the stone hearth. 2 chairs sat facing it, and Aldrich moved to one of them with the careful economy of a man who had learned not to waste movement, and lowered himself into it, and looked at the fire. Caden took the other chair. For a moment neither of them spoke. This was the way of things with Aldrich. You did not rush him, because rushing Aldrich produced nothing. He moved at his own speed, which was the speed of something that understood time differently than most. Marcus told you to come to me, Aldrich said, not a question. He said there was something I needed to hear from you, something about my father, something I was never told. Aldrich nodded slowly, still looking at the fire. Your father was a great alpha, he said. You know this, the pack knows this. It is carved into the portrait wall and spoken at the moon ceremonies and true in every way that matters for the history of Ashwood. He paused. But your father was also a man, and men, even great ones, make decisions from the places inside themselves they are least willing to examine. And sometimes those decisions have long consequences. Caden said nothing. He sat straight in his chair and waited. 27 years ago, Aldrich began, your father made a treaty. Caden knew about the treaties his father had made. There had been several border agreements, pack alliances, trade arrangements between territories. He had studied all of them when he took the alpha seat. He knew them the way he knew the pack's patrol routes, completely and precisely. "I know the treaties," he said. "You know the ones that were recorded," Aldrich said. He turned and looked at Caden directly for the first time since he had sat down. "You do not know the one that was not." The fire crackled. Outside, the first grey light of dawn was beginning to show at the edges of the small, deep-set windows. 27 years ago, Aldrich continued, your father was in the middle of the worst territorial crisis Ashwood had faced in 2 generations. You know the history the Eastern packs were pushing, the Southern Alliance had fractured, and Greywood was new then, Malik's father just risen to alpha, hungry and aggressive, and testing every border within reach. He folded his weathered hands in his lap. What you do not know is that during the lowest point of that crisis, when Ashwood's resources were stretched, and 3 of your father's most senior warriors had been killed in a single border raid, your father received an offer. From who? From the Silvermark Pack. Caden was still. The Silvermark Pack had not existed for 15 years. They had been absorbed peacefully into a larger Western alliance when their alpha line failed. But 27 years ago, they had been one of the most powerful packs in the region. Old money, old bloodlines, enormous territory. What kind of offer? Caden said. Aldrich looked at the fire again. A blood pact, he said. The Silvermark Alpha had a daughter. Your father had a son, you, 3 months old at the time, sleeping in the Alpha's hall while your father negotiated the survival of everything around you. The Silvermark Alpha proposed a future mating bond, a promise, sealed in blood and witnessed by both Pack's elders, that when the time came, the Ashwood Alpha's son would take the Silvermark Alpha's daughter as his true mate. In exchange, Silvermark would commit their full military alliance to Ashwood's defense, immediately and unconditionally. Caden felt something happen in his chest. Something very quiet and very significant. My father agreed, he said. It was not a question. He could hear the answer in the architecture of everything Aldrich was saying, in the way the old wolf was building toward it with such careful, measured steps. Your father agreed, Aldrich said. He had no choice, or he believed he had no choice, which amounts to the same thing when you are watching your pack bleed. He signed the pact, he gave his blood, he spoke the words. The old wolf paused. And then Silvermark sent their warriors, and Ashwood survived the crisis, and the eastern packs were pushed back, and Greywood retreated to lick its wounds. And your father rebuilt. And when things were stable again, and you were growing up and strong and completely unaware, your father made a second decision. He decided that the pact would never be spoken of. He decided that when the time came, he would find a way around it. He believed he was powerful enough to manage the consequences. And was he, Caden said. He died before the time came, Aldrich said simply. He left you the alpha seat at 21, and he left you the pact as a silence, a thing buried so deep that only 4 people in the world knew it existed, myself, your father's sworn keeper who died 2 years after him, Marcus's predecessor as Beta who also died, and 1 other. Caden looked at him. The Silvermark daughter, Aldrich said. The fire popped, a log shifted. The grey dawn light at the windows was deepening now, moving from grey toward the first pale gold. The Silvermark pack no longer exists, Caden said carefully. The pack no longer exists, Aldrich agreed. The daughter does. The room was very quiet. Caden sat in his chair with the stillness of a man who was processing something enormous and refusing to let it process faster than he could control. He looked at the fire. He felt the old wolf's eyes on the side of his face and did not look back. Tell me her name, he said. Aldrich was quiet for a moment that lasted long enough to be its own kind of answer. Her name, the old wolf said, is Sera. The world did not stop. The fire kept burning. The dawn kept coming. Outside, somewhere in the ancient trees of Ashwood, a bird began to call in the early morning dark, high and clear and indifferent to everything happening inside this small stone cottage. Caden sat completely still. Sera Cole, he said. His voice was flat, stripped of everything. Cole was her mother's name. Her mother took her and left the Silvermark territory when Sera was 4 years old, after the Alpha died and the pack began to fracture. They came to the Ashwood border lands. Her father, her Silvermark father, had already established a secondary identity, a cover name in the outer territories. The name Cole came from that cover. They were border wolves from that point forward. No one knew who they were. Aldrich paused. Except me. I knew the moment I saw her, the night her father brought her to the Great Hall. I recognized the Silvermark bloodline in her face. I have been waiting for 3 years to see what would happen. You have been waiting, Caden said very quietly, for 3 years while he stopped. While he had been circling her. While he had been watching her and not sleeping and writing 4-word letters with a pressed-down pen, and standing on moonlit ridges with grief in his eyes, instead of rage, because he could not make himself be angry at her, the way logic told him he should be. While the bond that his father had written into blood 27 years ago had been pulling at him the entire time, and he had not known what it was, had just felt it as something inexplicable, something that refused to be filed or managed or sealed away behind his thick fortress walls. It had not been inexplicable. It had been a pact. Does she know, he said. No. Her father, did he tell her? Her father died when she was 16, border fever the winter before she came of age. Whatever he knew he took with him. Aldrich folded his hands more firmly in his lap. She came to this pack as a loyal daughter of a border wolf. She has been nothing but that in all the time she has been here. Whatever she feels for you, and I am an old wolf, but I am not a blind one. It has grown in her the same way it has grown in you, without explanation, without being asked for. Like something the blood simply decided on its own. Caden stood up. He did not do it violently. He stood slowly, with great control, and walked to the small window and stood looking out at the pale gold of the arriving dawn through the old, slightly wavy glass. He stood there for a long time. Malik knows, he said, that is the wound. Malik knows about the pact. If Malik knows about the pact, Aldrich said from his chair, then he knows that Sera is Silvermark blood. And if he knows that, then he understands something that you are only just learning now. A blood pact between alphas does not simply bind the 2 people named in it, Caden said slowly, working it through out loud. It binds the packs. Yes. Which means if Sera is Silvermark line, and I am Ashwood Alpha, and the pact was never formally dissolved. Then the Silvermark pack's claim to Ashwood's alliance did not die with their territory, Aldrich said. It transferred to whoever holds Silvermark's surviving bloodline. He paused, which is currently Sera. Caden turned from the window. Malik is not just after the moon well, he said. No, he is after Sera. If he can take Sera, if he can claim or control the last Silvermark bloodline, then he can argue by the laws of the old pacts, a right of alliance transfer. He could use her existence to claim a legal stake in Ashwood's treaty obligations. He could use the pact to, Caden stopped. The shape of it was enormous and cold and very, very clear. He could walk into Ashwood not as an invader but as a claimant. Under pack law, a valid blood pact cannot be challenged by force. It has to be answered. The pack elders would be bound to hear it. Yes, Aldrich said, and a hearing would mean Malik's wolves inside Ashwood borders under a flag of law, and once inside. He would not need the moon wells. He would have everything. Caden stood in the middle of Aldrich's cottage, with the dawn coming through the windows and the fire burning low, and the full weight of a 27-year-old decision, pressing down on him from every direction. His father had signed a pact to save a pack, and then buried it to save himself the consequence, and then died and left the consequence for his son to find in the worst possible circumstances. Malik had known. Malik had been building toward this moment for years, maybe longer. The patrol routes, the shift schedules, the information Dell had been passing, none of it was about a military invasion. It was about building enough intelligence to move the moment he had his legal claim in order. The moment he had Sera. And Ren coming to Sera 8 months ago. Ren appearing from nowhere with his amber eyes and his careful way of moving and his story, about being a half-brother in need of help. Caden went still. Aldrich, he said, his voice was very controlled. Yes. Is there any world in which Ren is actually Sera's brother? The old wolf looked at him. In the look was the answer, and the answer was one word, and the word sat in the room between them like something that had been waiting a long time to be spoken. No, Aldrich said. The fire had burned down to embers. The dawn was fully gold now, pressing warm through the old glass. Somewhere outside the pack was waking up, wolves moving through the morning with the ordinary business of an ordinary day, unaware that the entire shape of their world was being redrawn in a small stone cottage at the edge of the inner grounds. Caden looked at Aldrich. Ren is Malik's wolf. Ren has always been Malik's wolf, Aldrich said quietly. He was placed on the eastern flatlands 3 years ago after Malik identified Sera as the Silvermark heir. He was given a constructed identity, a plausible story, and sent to find the border girl and become someone she would not turn away. He paused. He is not her brother. He has no Silvermark blood. His real name is not Ren. He is one of Malik's most skilled operatives, and he has spent 3 years becoming the one person in the world that Sera trusted completely. Caden thought about Sera in the small stone room last night, sitting beside the man she believed was her only family. He thought about what it was going to feel like when she found out. He thought about her face, those dark, steady eyes, and what they were going to do when they understood what had been done to her. He thought about the rage he felt on the ridge. And he realized that what he felt on the ridge had been nothing, a warm-up, a preview. What he felt right now was something considerably larger and considerably colder, and it had Malik's name written all through it. He moved to the door of the cottage with calm, deliberate steps. "Caden," Aldrich said. He stopped. "The boy in the South Passage room," the old wolf said carefully. "He is dangerous, not because he is violent, he may not be, but because Malik sent him to be the last person Sera would doubt. Which means whatever Ren tells her today or tomorrow or in the next hour she will believe it completely. And whatever Malik needs her to do. She would do it," Caden said, "because she thinks she loves him, because he is the only family she has left." "Yes." Caden stood in the doorway with the morning light falling across him, and thought about the woman sleeping in the South Passage room beside the man who had spent 3 years carefully, skillfully becoming her brother. He thought about what Malik needed Sera to do. He thought about the moon well, and the blood pact and the legal claim and what it would take to invoke it. And then he thought about something Ren had said last night, very casually, near the end of his 2 hours of talking. Something Caden had filed without fully examining at the time because there had been so many other things. Ren had said, "I told Sera before you arrived on the ridge that there might come a moment when she needed to leave Ashwood quickly. That if things moved too fast, I could get her out safely. I told her to trust me if that moment came." At the time, Caden had heard it as a frightened man, making contingency plans for his sister's safety. He heard it differently now. An exit plan. Malik did not need to take Sera by force. Malik needed Sera to walk out of Ashwood willingly, trusting the man beside her, believing she was being protected. And once she was outside Ashwood's borders in Malik's territory, with the blood pact documentation in Malik's hands, it would be over. Caden stepped out of the cottage and into the full gold of the morning. He walked fast, not running, because running attracted attention and attention was the one thing he could not afford right now. He walked through the inner grounds with the measured strides of an alpha doing his morning rounds, nodding at the 2 warriors he passed, giving nothing away. He walked to the South Passage entrance. He pulled the ivy aside. He moved down the dark corridor. And when he pushed open the door of the small stone room at the end of it, he found exactly what he had been half afraid he would find. 1 candle burned completely to nothing. 2 chairs pulled close together. And the room entirely, completely empty. They were gone. They are gone. Sera and the man she believes is her brother have disappeared from the South Passage room, and Caden is standing in an empty space where the only person he has ever allowed himself to need used to be. Malik's plan is in motion. The exit is happening right now, in real time, through the ancient forest of Ashwood, and Sera does not know, she does not know any of it. She does not know about the pact. She does not know about Ren. She does not know that the man walking beside her through the morning trees has never been who he said he was. Chapter 5 begins right now, and it is going to break you open. She had not wanted to go. That was the thing Sera would hold on to later in the days that followed, when she was trying to reconstruct the morning and understand how it had happened so fast. She had not wanted to go. Every part of her that was instinct and bone and blood had been pulling in the opposite direction, back toward the hall, back toward the stone room, back toward a pale-eyed alpha who had stood in a doorway the night before, and said things in the spaces between his words that she was still trying to fully hear. But Ren had woken her before dawn with his hand on her shoulder and his voice low and urgent, and he had said, "We have to move right now," and something in the way he said it had reached into the part of her that had been shaped by years of border living, years of her father saying those exact words in that exact tone on nights when the pack boundaries shifted and safety became a moving thing. And before she was fully awake, she was on her feet. He had said Caden's warriors were coming. He had said someone in the hall had talked, that Wren's presence in the South Passage had been discovered and reported, and that the Alpha had given the order overnight, and that if they did not move in the next 10 minutes, there would be no moving at all. He had said, "I promised I would get you out if it came to this. It has come to this, trust me." And Sera, half asleep and wrong-footed, and full of a fear that she had not yet had time to examine, had trusted him. They had moved through the South Passage in the dark, Wren ahead and Sera behind, and out through the ivy curtain into the cold blue of the hour before dawn. The forest was still and dark and enormous around them, the ancient trees pressing close on every side, their roots like sleeping giants beneath the earth. Wren had moved fast and quiet through the trees with the ease of someone who had mapped this route before, and Sera had followed, her boots soft on the forest floor, her mind beginning to wake up and ask questions that her body was already too far along to stop and answer. They had been walking for 20 minutes before the first thing felt wrong. It was small, almost nothing, the direction. Sera had grown up on the border of Ashwood. She had walked this forest in every season and every weather since she was old enough to walk it alone. She knew the trees the way you knew the furniture in a room you had lived in all your life, not by thinking about them, but by a deep, unexamined familiarity that lived below thought. She knew which way the ground sloped toward the eastern boundary. She knew the smell of the air when you were moving toward the inner territory versus the outer edge. She knew the particular quality of light that came through the canopy when you were heading north. They were not heading toward the border. They were heading deeper in. She stopped walking. Wren. He kept moving for 2 steps before he registered her stillness and turned around. His face in the grey pre-dawn light was calm. Too calm, the kind of calm that was a held thing rather than a natural one. "We have to keep moving," he said. "We are going the wrong way," she said. Something shifted behind his amber eyes, fast and small and gone. But she had been watching people's faces her entire life. It was what you did when you were a border wolf, a low-ranking female in a world full of larger and more powerful creatures. You watched faces. You read the thing behind the thing. She read it now. And her blood went cold. "Wren," she said, her voice was very careful, "where are we going?" "I told you, out of the territory. There is a safe route through the northern." "The northern passage goes toward Greywood Lands," she said. He was quiet for 1 second too long. 1 second, that was all it took. Sera took a step back. Her feet found the earth automatically, settling into the wide, rooted stance her father had taught her, balanced, ready, the stance you took when you did not know yet whether you were about to run or fight, but you needed to be prepared for both. "Who are you?" she said. "Sera. Do not say my name like that, do not use that voice with me." Her own voice was steady in a way that surprised her because underneath it everything was shaking. "Who are you? Because I have been sitting with a feeling since last night that I could not name, and I am naming it now. You move like a trained operative. You mapped this route before we walked it. You woke me with exactly the right words in exactly the right order to make me move without thinking, and you know this forest better than a man who has never been to Ashwood should know it." She held his gaze. "So I am going to ask you one more time. Who are you?" The forest was very quiet around them. Wren, or the man who had called himself Wren, looked at her for a long moment with those careful amber eyes. And then, slowly, something in his face changed, not dramatically. It was more like a mask settling into a slightly different position, revealing the edges of the structure beneath it. Still controlled, still watchful, but different. "My name is Caelix," he said. "I serve the Greywood Alpha." The words hit her like cold water. She did not move. "You are not my brother," she said. "No. You were never my brother." "No." 3 years, she thought about 3 years of letters in her father's handwriting that Caelix had somehow obtained or forged. 3 years of a carefully constructed story that had slotted perfectly into the gaps of her own history. Her father's silence, her mother's early death, the missing pieces of a life that had always felt slightly incomplete. 3 years of meetings in forest clearings and border edges and moonlit ridges. 3 years of slowly becoming the one person she trusted without question. 3 years of being built into a door that someone else intended to walk through. "The night on the ridge," she said, "you were saying goodbye." "I was preparing you," he said, quietly without cruelty, as though honesty at this point was the only thing he had left to offer. "Malik needed you emotionally destabilized, needed you to feel like things were falling apart. Needed the alpha to see something that looked like betrayal so that his attention would fracture at exactly the right time. And then you came back, she said, and you told me everything, the spy, Malik's plan, the information you had passed. You offered yourself up as a resource. You walked into Caden's hall and you gave him just enough truth to make him trust you. She was working through it as she spoke, the shape of it assembling itself with horrible clarity. And then you woke me before he could get back to the room, because if he got back to the room before we left, he would have found things, Caelix said, things I could not allow him to find. What things? Caelix reached into his jacket and withdrew a small leather document case, worn and dark with age. He held it for a moment, and she could see that he was making a decision about something, a real decision, not a performance. Something was happening behind those amber eyes that was not entirely scripted. What is in that case, she said. He looked at it, then at her. The reason you matter to Malik, he said. The reason all of this was necessary. He paused. The reason I was sent to find you 3 years ago and make you trust me. Another pause, longer. And the reason I have spent the last 6 months trying to find a way to not do what I was sent here to do. Sera stared at him. Open it, she said. He opened it. Inside were 2 documents. Old ones, the paper thick and slightly yellowed at the edges, the ink faded but legible. Each one bore a wax seal. One seal was a wolf mid-leap against a crescent moon, a sigil she did not recognize. The other was 2 wolves facing each other across a full moon, which she recognized instantly because it was carved into the great hall doors of Ashwood. Her father's name was on both of them. Her real father's name. Not Cole, the other name. The Silvermark name that her mother had told her once in a low voice late at night, and made her promise never to say out loud. She read the documents standing in the cold pre-dawn forest with her hands absolutely steady and her heart, doing something she had never felt it do before. Not racing, not stopping, but expanding, like something inside her was getting larger to hold what she was reading. When she finished, she looked up. I am Silvermark, she said. You are the last Silvermark heir, Caelix said, and the pact your bloodline made with Ashwood has never been dissolved. Malik has known for 4 years. I was sent to find you, secure your trust, and bring you to Greywood so that Malik could use your existence to invoke the pact's alliance transfer clause. He looked at her steadily. If you enter Greywood territory willingly with the documents in hand, and Malik presents you to the Elder Council as the Silvermark heir invoking alliance transfer, Ashwood is legally bound to answer. He does not have to invade. He walks in under law. And I would be the key he used to do it, she said. Yes. The forest breathed around them. Somewhere above the canopy, the sky was shifting from deep grey to the first pale pink of early morning, the kind of colour that looked gentle and was not. Why are you telling me this, she said. Right now, in this forest, you could have kept walking and I might not have caught it until we were at the Greywood border. Caelix looked at her for a long moment. Because I have spent 3 years pretending to be your brother, he said quietly. And somewhere in those 3 years something happened that I did not account for and cannot fully explain, which is that I started to actually, he stopped, pressed his lips together. You are not what I expected. People who have been told they are nothing tend to become small. You did not become small. You became more real than anyone I had been sent to find before, and I have been sent to find a great many people. He looked at the documents in his hand. I cannot undo 3 years. I cannot give you back what was taken, but I can give you these. He held the documents out to her. She looked at them. If you hold those documents, he said, Malik cannot invoke the pact without you. The pact requires the Silvermark heir's willing participation. It is written into the clause itself. The original architects of the pact did not want it weaponized, so they built in the requirement of willing consent. Without the documents and your agreement, it is an unenforceable historical record. He kept his hand extended. Take them back to Caden. Tell him everything. The documents give Ashwood the ability to formally dissolve the pact under elder law, which closes Malik's legal window permanently. Sera looked at the documents. She looked at the man who was not her brother. And you, she said, what happens to you? Something moved across his face that was tired and resigned and not entirely without dignity. I go back to Greywood with nothing, which means Malik will know I failed, which means he did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Sera understood what it meant for a Greywood wolf to return to Malik empty-handed, and having burned his own mission. She took the documents. She took them and held them against her chest with both hands, the old paper cool under her fingers, and she looked at Calyx for a moment, really looked at him. The way she had looked at people her whole life, looking for the thing behind the thing. What she saw was complicated, and not entirely clean, and probably never would be. Go east, she said, not back to Greywood, east to the neutral territories, stay out of Malik's reach for as long as you can manage it. She paused, and do not thank me, this does not make us even, it does not make us anything, but I am not going to stand here and watch someone walk knowingly toward, she stopped. Go east. He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once and turned and disappeared into the trees. And Sera stood alone in the ancient forest of Ashwood, as the sky continued its slow movement toward morning, with the documents pressed against her chest, and the full weight of everything she had just learned settling into her body like the cold, settled into the ground in winter, deep and complete, and changing the temperature of everything it touched. She turned and began to walk back. She walked fast, not running, with her eyes forward and her jaw set, and her mind moving through everything in rapid, organized strokes. The pact, the Silvermark blood, what it meant for Ashwood, what it meant for Caden, what it meant for the thing that had been building between them for 3 years without either of them understanding what was underneath it. Whether what she felt was real. Whether what he felt was real. Or whether all of it, every look, every circling, every pressed down pen on a 4-word letter, had simply been a blood pact doing what blood pacts did, pulling 2 people toward each other across time and distance and willful ignorance, patient as gravity, indifferent to what either of them wanted. She did not have an answer to that yet. She was not sure she could bear the answer yet. She walked for 15 minutes through the brightening forest, and she was so deep inside her own thoughts that she did not hear him until he was close. She heard him the way you heard powerful things in the forest, not with your ears first, but with the part of you that was still animal, still instinct, still wired for the awareness of what else was alive and moving and significant in the world around you. She stopped. She turned. Caden was standing 15 feet behind her on the forest path, slightly out of breath from moving fast through the trees, his dark hair across his forehead and his pale eyes fixed on her, with an expression she had never seen on his face before and would not have had a name for 3 days ago. She had a name for it now. Relief. Raw and unguarded and real, the way emotions were real when they arrived faster than the walls could go up. He looked at her standing alone in the forest, no Calyx, no documents visible, just Sera with her hands at her sides and her chin up, and those dark, steady eyes. And for a moment he simply stood there and looked at her, and his chest rose and fell once with a breath that seemed like it came from somewhere very deep. You came back, he said. I was always coming back, she said. He walked toward her. She did not move. He stopped when he was close, the same distance he had stood from her in the great hall, close enough that she had to look up slightly to hold his gaze. Where is he? Caden said. Gone, she said. I sent him east. Something moved in his pale eyes. You know. I know everything, she said, or close enough to everything that the rest does not change the shape of it. She held up the documents, and I have these. He looked at them. He reached out and took them with careful hands, the way you took things that were old and important and had been through a great deal. He looked at the seals, at the faded ink, at his own pack sigil pressed into yellow wax. He looked at it for a long time. Sera, he said, still looking at the documents. I know what you are going to ask, she said. I do not think you do. You are going to ask whether what I feel is real or whether it is the pact, whether 3 years of... No, he said. She stopped. He looked up from the documents and at her, and his pale grey eyes were very clear and very direct and full of something that had clearly been living in them for longer than either of them had admitted. I am going to ask, he said, whether you are all right, because you just found out that the only family you believed you had left was a lie constructed by my enemy. You found out your bloodline is something you did not know it was. You found out that the ground you have been standing on for 3 years is a different ground than you thought. He paused. And you are standing in a forest in the early morning looking like you are holding yourself together by deciding to, which is something I recognize because I do it every single day, and I am asking you whether you are all right. Sera looked at him. For a moment she could not speak. Because no one, not in 22 years, not through any of it, had ever asked her that first. Before the strategy and the documents and the pack and the pact and all the enormous machinery of consequence grinding forward, he had stopped and asked her whether she was all right. She felt something give way in the center of her chest. Not collapse, give way, the way a held breath gives way when you finally stop holding it. Clean and necessary and a long time coming. No, she said honestly, not right now. He nodded. He did not say anything. He did not offer solutions or strategy or the next 17 steps. He just nodded, and he closed the small remaining distance between them, and he put his hand on the back of her head with a gentleness that was entirely at odds with everything he was. This enormous, feared, iron-walled alpha, and he held her there carefully, with her forehead against his chest and his hand in her hair, while the forest morning opened around them and the birds began, and the light came gold and real through the ancient trees. She did not cry. She was not built for crying in the open. But she pressed her forehead against his chest and she let herself be held for exactly as long as she needed, and he did not move, and he did not speak, and he did not make her feel like this was a moment that needed to be over faster than it was. When she finally stepped back, she looked up at him. "The pact," she said, "is it?" "It does not matter right now," he said. "It does matter. It matters because I need to know whether." "Sera," his voice was quiet. His hand was still in her hair slightly. "Whatever the pact is or is not, whatever the blood decided 27 years ago, I have been standing in doorways for 3 years not saying things I should have said. I have been building walls around something that was not going to let itself be walled. And I am done pretending that what I feel is something I can file away and seal and manage because I have tried and I cannot, and I am many things but I am not a liar." He looked at her steadily. "What I feel is mine. It is not the pact's, and I would feel it in any life, in any world, with or without a piece of old paper with my father's blood on it." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached up and put her hand flat against the scar on his jaw, the one that ran from the corner of his mouth to his chin, the one from the war he had won at 19, and she felt him go very still under her hand. "Then say the things you should have said," she said quietly. "We have time." He looked at her. And for the first time in the 3 years she had known him, the most feared alpha in 6 territories said something in a voice that was not controlled or managed or sealed behind anything at all. He said her name. Just that, just her name, in a voice that was the real one, the one below all the others, the one that had no use for fortress walls or narrow windows. And in the saying of it, everything was said. They stood together in the morning forest of Ashwood, the ancient trees around them and the golden light and the old documents in his hand. And the world kept moving the way the world did, Malik still planning in his dark hall, Del still smiling in his bed. The pack still waking to what it believed was an ordinary day. But something had shifted in the forest. Something had settled. And far away at the edge of the greywood border, a wolf named Calyx stopped walking east and turned, and looked back toward Ashwood for a long moment. Then he turned east again. And walked. And in the greywood Alpha's hall, Malik sat at his table in the early morning dark, and waited for word from his operative. The word did not come. Malik sat for a long time. And then slowly he set down his cup. And his face, for the first time in a very long time, showed something. Not rage, not surprise. Something colder than both. Recalculation. Because Malik had not built everything on one plan. Malik had never in his life built everything on one plan. There were other wolves in Ashwood. There were other doors. There was Del, still smiling in his bed, still unaware that the Alpha had found him, still believing he was Malik's unseen hand inside the enemy's house. And there was one more thing. One final piece that not even Ren, not even Calyx, had known about. A piece Malik had kept entirely to himself, locked in the deep part of his strategy where he kept the things he did not share, because the things he did not share were always the things that mattered most. One more door into Ashwood. One that Caden did not know existed. Malik stood up from his table. He walked to the window of his hall and looked out at the morning. He was not finished. He had barely started. Malik is recalculating. Del is still in position and still dangerous. Caden and Sera are standing in a forest with their walls finally down and their truths finally said, and they have no idea that there is a door inside Ashwood that neither of them knows about. The pack meeting was called for midday. Caden had not called a full pack meeting in 8 months. not since the border dispute with the Southern Territories that had nearly turned into open war before he had closed it down with the kind of cold, precise negotiation that made other alphas grateful they were not his enemy. A full pack meeting meant every wolf in Ashwood territory gathered in the Great Hall and the surrounding grounds, from the senior warriors down to the youngest border families. It meant no one was absent and no one was exempt, and everyone was watching everyone else, which was exactly what Caden needed. He had spent the 2 hours between the forest and midday moving with a purpose that was quiet on the outside and absolute on the inside. He had spoken to Marcus first, standing in the inner corridor with the morning light coming through the high windows, and he had told him everything: Calyx, the documents, the pact, what Sera had done in the forest. He had watched Marcus absorb it all with that steady brown face and those sharp eyes, and when he finished, Marcus had said only, "And Dell." And Caden had said, "Dell is why we are calling the meeting." He had spoken to Aldrich next in the old wolf's cottage, laying the documents flat on the small table near the hearth. Aldrich had looked at them for a long time with his deep forest eyes, and then he had looked at Caden and he had said, "Your father would not have known how to do what you are about to do." Caden had said, "I know," and Aldrich had said, "That is not a criticism," and Caden had understood that it was not. He had spoken to Sera last. She was in the guest chamber now, a proper room, not the south passage, with a fire and a window that looked out over the inner grounds, and a door that locked from the inside at her choice. He had brought her there himself, and he had stood in the doorway for a moment, and she had looked at him from across the room with those dark, steady eyes. He had told her to stay inside until he sent Marcus for her. He had told her that what was about to happen in the Great Hall would be loud and would look worse than it was, and that he needed her to trust him through it. She had said, "I have trusted you this far." He had said, "I know, this is the part where I try to deserve it." And he had pulled the door shut and walked to the Great Hall. Now it was midday and the hall was full. Every wolf in Ashwood was present, 230 bodies packed into the great timbered space, the air thick with pack warmth and the particular tension that gathered when the alpha called everyone together without explanation. They knew something was happening. Wolves always knew. You could feel it moving through the crowd like a current under still water, the shift of eyes, the angled bodies, the low murmur of voices saying nothing specific because no one knew anything specific yet. Dell was standing near the left wall with a group of household guard wolves, exactly where Caden expected him to be. He had a straight, easy posture and his eyes were calm, moving across the room with the practiced look of a man who was confident in his position. He had spent 3 years being confident in his position. He had no reason not to be. He had not yet looked at Caden. Caden stood at the front of the hall before the alpha's seat. He did not sit. He looked out across the gathered pack, 230 faces, most of them loyal, most of them his, all of them watching him with the attentive, animal awareness that packs gave their alpha in moments of significance. He let the silence run for a full 10 seconds. Then he spoke. "3 nights ago," he said, "I stood on Moonstone Ridge and saw something that I misread." The murmur that moved through the crowd was subtle but present. This was not how alpha addresses began. Alphas did not open with admissions of misreading. Caden felt it, the shift in the room, and let it move and settle. "I misread it," he continued, "because I was meant to. Because someone in this pack engineered that moment specifically so that I would see it and feel what I felt and be distracted at exactly the right time." He paused. "I am not distracted now." The room was very quiet. "Ashwood has been compromised," he said. "Not from outside our borders, from inside them. Someone in this pack has been passing intelligence to the Greywood Alpha for 3 years, patrol routes, shift schedules, the names of senior warriors, private information about decisions made inside this hall that should never have left these walls." The quiet became a different kind of quiet, harder, more focused. "I know who it is," Caden said. He let that sit for exactly 3 seconds. Then he looked directly at Dell. And Dell, to his credit, did not run. He stood against the left wall and met Caden's gaze with a composure that was either genuine or very well trained. And for one moment, the two of them looked at each other across the packed hall with the full weight of everything between them. Then Dell moved. Not toward the door. Toward the center of the hall, which was not what Caden had expected, which told him immediately that Dell was not done performing. "Alpha," Dell said in a clear, carrying voice. "Before you say my name, and I know you are about to say my name, I need the pack to hear something first." The room shifted. Bodies turned. 230 wolves looking now at the young warrior in the center of the hall, and Caden watching from the front with his arms at his sides and his face giving nothing away. This was the thing about trained operatives. They had contingencies. They had plans inside plans. Del had been caught, and Del knew he had been caught, and Del was doing what Malik's wolves did when they were caught. They did not collapse. They pivoted. They found the next available angle and they took it. I have been passing information to Greywood, Del said. That is true, I will not stand here and say it is not. He looked around the room at the pack, at the faces turning toward him with shock and confusion and the beginning of anger. But I did not do it for Malik. I did it because I was told to. By someone in this pack who outranks me. Someone who told me it was authorized. Someone who said the Alpha himself had sanctioned a back channel to Greywood as a peace strategy. The room erupted. Not loudly in that particular wolf way, which was a mass adjustment of posture, a deepening of attention, a collective held breath that was louder than shouting. Caden did not react. He watched Del's face and tracked every micro-movement with the patience of a man who had anticipated this exact turn. Del was pointing the finger. He was giving the pack a second name. He was doing it publicly in front of everyone, so that even if no one believed him, the accusation would live in the air of the hall and complicate everything and give Malik's story legs it could walk on later. Who told you? Caden said, flat and even. A question that was also a trap because whatever name Del gave, Caden needed to hear it. Del looked at him, and in his eyes, for just a fraction of a second, something showed that was not composure and was not performance. It was a question. Had Caden already found the other door? Did he already know the name? Was there any version of what came next that Del could navigate to safety? The fraction of a second passed. Del said, Marcus. The name hit the room like a stone hitting water. Ripples everywhere, immediate and widening. Caden looked at his beater. Marcus was standing at the right side of the hall near the senior warriors, and his broad, steady face showed something that Caden had never seen on it in 20 years. Not guilt, not fear. Fury. The clean, deep, controlled fury of a man who has been accused of the one thing he would die rather than do. That, Marcus said, in a voice that was very quiet and very final, is a lie. I can prove it, Del said quickly. He reached into his jacket, the same gesture Calix had made in the forest with the document case, and Caden filed that similarity and withdrew a small folded paper. I have written records of every instruction I was given, dates, times, specific operational details. The handwriting can be verified. He held the paper up. And Caden said, give it to Aldrich. Del hesitated. Give it to Aldrich, Caden said again, right now in front of the pack. Del walked the paper to the old wolf, who was standing near the front of the hall, and Aldrich took it with his weathered hands and unfolded it, and looked at it for a long, unhurried time. The hall waited. Aldrich looked up, he looked at Del, he looked at Caden. This is Malik's script, Aldrich said simply. The handwriting matches the letters his operatives have used in every recorded communication with Ashwood border wolves going back 12 years. I know this script. I have been looking at it for 12 years. He folded the paper again. Marcus did not write this. The room shifted again. The current under the water changed direction. Del looked at Aldrich, and something in his composure finally, visibly cracked. I want the pack to understand something, Caden said, stepping forward from the Alpha's seat now, moving into the center of the hall with a slow, deliberate walk that brought him to within 10 feet of Del. Malik built this operation in layers. He built it so that when it was uncovered, there would be enough noise and confusion and accusation to keep Ashwood looking inward while he moved outward. Del is not the architect. Del is a layer. He is a young wolf who was recruited, shaped, and positioned to serve a purpose, and he has served it faithfully, and now he is doing the last thing he was trained to do, which is create enough chaos on his way out that Malik still benefits from the wreckage. He stopped in front of Del, looked at him directly. I am not going to make the wreckage Malik is hopping for, he said, because this pack does not fall apart, not while I am standing. Del looked back at him. The composure was gone now. What was left was younger and more uncertain, and underneath both of those things, something that looked like it might have been relief. As though being caught was, after 3 years of being what Del had been, not entirely the worst thing that could happen. You will be held, Caden said, fairly under pack law with a council of elders to hear everything you know, not Malik's version. Yours, whatever you give us from your own account, will be weighed accordingly. He paused. That is not mercy. That is intelligence. Every piece of information you have about Malik's operation is a piece I intend to use. He turned to the hall. This is not the end of the threat, he said. Malik has other plans and other wolves, and he will not stop because this one failed. What I am telling you today is not that Ashwood is safe. It is that Ashwood is awake. And there is a difference between those two things that matters more than anything else I could say to you right now. He looked across 230 faces. His pack, his people. We prepare, he said. As of today, as of this moment, we begin preparing for what is coming, not with fear, but with the full strength of what this pack is. Which is something Malik has significantly underestimated. There was a beat of silence. And then, from the back of the hall, from one of the elder border wolves, a grey-faced woman who had been in Ashwood longer than most people in the room had been alive. A single sound. Not a cheer, not a shout. The low, resonant, chest-deep sound that wolves made in the old language when they were affirming their alpha. When they were saying, "We are here, we see you, we stand." It moved through the hall like a wave. 230 voices, one sound, filling the great timbered space and going up into